All right, so video 3 on the day, we're going to go through a client profile. This is just kind of my mental framework on how to work through kind of basic issues you'd have with a client. We first go through what relative joint range of motions they're lacking. Then we think about accessories to fix it. Then we think about mains to fix it. And then I'll take you through my diagnostic process once I've gotten clinical impressions from a clinician to kind of work through this. So this client currently has no IR in their left hip, resulting in low back pain. Typically what will happen is when we lack access to IR through that hip, we also lack access to hip extension, which means that we end up with lumbar extension, which means that we end up with low back pain on that left side. Right shoulder has no external rotation, and then they end up with elbow pain, because essentially the shoulder's not moving, so the elbow's being asked to move. If you ask a hinge joint to move like a ball and socket joint, it doesn't move that way, so it hurts. Left knee, they're ending up with lateral knee pain, right? So these two things are related. The left knee and the left hip are related. I'm going to explain why later, but it's important to note that whenever we have issues present at the knee, sometimes it's the knee, but much more commonly it's upstream at the hip, because the hip is a stronger force-producing joint, and lack of range of motion in the hip oftentimes presents at the knee. So with this left hip, when we think about accessories to work on that left hip, we're just going to be loading through IR, right? So that may start like an internal rotation bias front foot split squat, which is then going to go to an internal rotation bias regular split squat, and then an internal rotation bias rear foot elevated split squat. We're going to start with a internally rotated single leg RDL to force ourselves into as much internal rotation as possible. That would progress to a B stance RDL, and then that would progress to a regular RDL with an internal rotation bias or a knock knee. In terms of mains to work through this left hip, we would start with deviating center of mass forward, so we're asking less of the hip. So that would look like a front box squat. And then we would go to a SSB box, and then we would go to a high bar box. So each time that load's coming a little bit further back, a little bit closer to the hip. And as we've worked on that relative hip range of motion in the background, we should notice that we have access to additional IR, and this low back pain kind of starts to disappear. Now, with this right shoulder, in terms of accessories, right? So if we think about it, if we lack access to IR, that probably means our internal rotators are very tight. So any exercise where we're going to be lengthening the lat or the pec is going to be really, really, really beneficial. And then anything in active ER, right? So that's going to be single arm cable Cuban press. That's going to be Cuban presses with a dumbbell. That's going to be seated dumbbell power cleans. Anything that you're loading into that externally rotated position is going to be beneficial. It's going to help clean this up. Now, when someone has that elbow pain and they lack the ER, the first thing that we have to do is set up external constraints to allow them to work through that range of motion in the main work without having to think about it or cue it. So the first thing that we're going to do is football bar flipped around, right? So those football bars have a camber, so you're going to have them flip it around so it's less of a range of motion. Because of the neutral grip, it naturally biases their elbow into external rotation, the shoulder into external rotation. So we're loading through that externally rotated position. That's block 1. Block 2, we would progress that to a floor press, where they start to take those skills that they've learned and apply it to the floor press. And then we would increase range of motion further, and then we would finish with a Spotto. And then month 4, they might actually go back to the competition press. So, big thing about this left knee. A lot of the times, the knee pain's a red herring, right? So everyone's always like, oh, knee pain, I gotta treat the knee, but they don't look upstream at the hip. And in actuality, if you clean up a lot of this hip stuff, the knee pain goes away. Just like the elbow in that shoulder, right? So you had elbow pain because the right shoulder wasn't moving. You're having knee pain because the hip's not moving. So it's the same thing, right? Oftentimes with the elbow in the knee, you're gonna look upstream at the shoulder in the hip. And that's just kind of a basic generality that's going to help you be able to pin things down a little bit better. So when we're putting together client profiles, we always want to think, what are the range of motion deficits? What accessories can we do? What mains can we do? What do the progression of the accessories look like? What do the progression of the mains look like? And that's going to give us a really, really good and easy framework to start off of to be able to get them working towards training without pain.